Okay. Um, Raise your hand if you just spent the whole first part of your day making a video about does Lamine Yamal deserve the Ballon d'Or just for Ousmane Dembele to win it? Just me? Okay. Um, Listen, this is more of like just an instant reaction because the last video I did was like very, very like, scripted and all that kind of stuff. So this is just off the dome. But I think my headline for this particular Ballon d'Or is that we really need Haaland and Mbappe to have a good season. Because for me, Lamine Yamal did not really deserve the Ballon d'Or because although he had great highlights and he was super exciting to watch, and at a lot of points during that season, it did feel like you're watching the best player in the world. He didn't have the achievements that Dembele had. And so that in itself, I think, really kind of like hurt him. And I don't even think he was at certain points the most decisive player in Barcelona's season. I thought for a lot of that season, Raphinha was the most decisive player, which is different than the best player, most exciting, or, the most decisive, because Raphinha had more goals and I believe more assists than him. And Dembele had a lot of goals and assists. They both had better GA and more outstanding performances in the Champions League. Obviously, Dembele winning it with PSG. So I think, where Lamine Yamal has the streets and, he's won the Copa Trophy and he's very much the next man up. He was never the person that should have won it. Now, with Dembele, I do think there's still an element of he was the best, but he's not the best we've ever seen, and he's not even close. Um, don't get me wrong, Dembele is the story of Dembele getting to this point is, to me, much more important than anything else, because I feel like oftentimes players get these huge price tags and they're largely written off because they don't live up to those price tags like he did when he was at Barcelona. He moved to PSG and has become their talisman, their guy, like their captain, their leader, and he's done exceptionally well leading that PSG side to their first ever Champions League. So I don't want to take that away from him, but I do think that because what didn't feel as definitive as it's felt in the past with players like Ronaldo and Messi. And it's unfair to compare players like Dembele and Lamine Yamal to those players. But ultimately, when we're talking about the Ballon d'Or, we're not just talking about your achievements and your goals and your assists. We're talking about your influence as well, which is something that I talked about in the video that I made before, is influence. And influence is so important, I feel. And I think that the Ballon d'Or, when you start talking about the best player in the world, you also want to be looking at somebody that is a superstar, transcends the sport. That's what the Ballon d'Or feels like for me. And this is probably why I had a little bit of like a side eye towards the Rodri one. It's not because I didn't feel like he deserved it based on everybody else's performances in comparison to his credentials versus everybody else's, but I felt like there was an underwhelming aspect to it. One, because he wasn't an attacker, and two, because he doesn't radiate that same level of superstar, and he's not like that, if that makes sense. And I know Manchester City fans, do not hate me, do not come for me, but you know what I mean when we talking about, the Ballon d'Or and what that represents and the type of player that you want to see holding that trophy. Now, you have to pick from the best group that you have, but I think when you start looking down the list and you start looking at the players that were nominated and you look at the player that it ultimately goes to, you start to see that maybe the headline is, like I said before, not so much about Dembele and whether or not he deserves it. It's where we are in football, where we're really lacking that peak stardom and that stardust that we had with peak Messi and Ronaldo. And I think it's a big, big deal that Mbappe is coming back into the form that he is, and he's having the season that he's having so far, because he's probably the only player that I can think of, and a little bit maybe Haaland, that have that je ne sais quoi that you're looking for. So when you do look at the Ballon d'Or, you're like, "Ugh, of course it's Mbappe." And if it's two people against each other, it's because not only do they have the accolades and the trophies and, the superstar performances, but they also have the streets. They have I hate the word, but they have the aura, they have that extra little thing, they have influence, and so I feel like that's the unspoken thing in the Ballon d'Or that's probably been missing over the last 2, rounds, or the last 2 years, is that neither of the players that have won it have the influence that the players of the past had, and that's more of an indictment on the sport and where we are, and maybe a greater conversation about the lack of stars because of the robotic nature and the team kind of like, coaching the star out of players and kind of making them all like little robots and doing the same things and, the pepification of football and how we need a new group of stars to come to the forefront to make these types of awards feel like they're being awarded to players that make sense. Because I feel like with Dembele, there's always gonna be, like, an element of he deserved it, but he doesn't feel quite as on the he doesn't feel like on the level of some of the other people that have won it in the past. That's gonna sound incredibly harsh because, of course, Dembele was always touted to be something special, but I'm just thinking about it from my vantage point. Maybe it's just old man shouting at cloud, but it lacks something when the player doesn't have the level of influence that players in the past have had. And so, of course, Dembele, out of all of the people that could have possibly gotten it, is the best option, I feel. I think you can make a pretty decent argument for Lamine Yamal as well, but ultimately Lamine Yamal did not have the accolades and the trophies that Dembele had, and I think, like, if Barcelona had won the Champions League, he would have won the Ballon d'Or. Like, I don't even think that there's a question. If, the Inter tie had went differently and we had gotten the final that we deserved, and he had played a huge part in them winning against PSG, Lamine Yamal would have won it. I think that's actually the difference between, like, why we're seeing the results as they are, but congratulations to Ousmane Dembele, you're definitely the best of who should have been considered. But I wanna know what you guys think in the comments because, again, this is just off the dome, so this wasn't super formulated, there's no script or anything, but just off the top of my head, there's something missing from football right now. It's way beyond the Ballon d'Or, but it does you start to ask the question because of who's winning the Ballon d'Or these days and who's being nominated. And listen, I know somebody in the comment section will be like, yeah, but Declan Rice was nominated. And I'm like, but that's exactly what I'm talking about. As much as I love Declan Rice, I love him down boots. That's my guy. But yeah, we're living in an era where, it should be harder or we should be seeing a different caliber of player at a certain level in the Ballon d'Or rankings, and we're not seeing that. Um, but yeah, that's just my reaction to it. I hope nobody gets mad at me for saying, but I'd love to know what you guys think. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye, guys.